Looking at flex spots this week, there are a couple guys that we think might dominate in that position, starting with Zay Jones. Zay Jones is a guy that at the time of the recording of this video only has 37% rostership on Sleeper. And look, he's not only a flex play in our opinion, he's a solid waiver pickup. I mean, he's a guy that could have made it on our waiver pickups videos and probably should have. He had a 22% target share in week 1. That is very consistent with last year, where over the course of the entire season, he had a
22% target share.
So again, this is not anything new, but he was able to turn it into fantasy points in week 1 against the Colts. He not only out-targeted Christian Kirk, he outsnapped Christian Kirk. I mean, he had an 89% snap share with 16.5 fantasy points. He was the wide receiver 17, so he's a mid-wide receiver too. He had 7 targets. He had 5 of those receptions. He had 55 yards, and he had a touchdown. So again, Zay Jones, when you're looking at him this week, going to be playing the Kansas City defense. And looking at the Kansas City defense on PFF, I mean, Trent McDuffie grades out well, but outside of that, their next cornerback on there is going to be Joshua Williams, who does not grade out well. This is kind of the story of the Kansas City Chiefs secondary. I mean, Trent McDuffie's pretty good, and outside of that, it's like, it's okay. I mean, so 27th overall in pass coverage, according to PFF in week 1. So that's a matchup that we're going to be looking at all year and being like, okay, maybe we're going to take advantage of this from a wide receiver perspective.
And the Jaguars have a lot more weapons than the Lions did.
Ton more. I mean, you're not only talking about Christian Kirk, you're talking about Zay Jones, you're talking about Evan Ingram, you're talking about Calvin Ridley, you're talking about ETN. That's going to be, running some routes. So again, this is going to open things up. And Zay Jones, in our opinion, we think Zay Jones builds on his week 1 performance. He gives you a week 2 performance that makes him worthy of flexing. So we like Zay Jones in week 1. And moving on to our next guy for the flex.
Yeah, so our next guy is going to be Kendrick Bourne here, who took 75% of his snaps out wide and 25% in the slot. Obviously, he's finishing as really a top 6 producing wide receiver this week. Right off the bat, 24 points in an offense that we saw pass the ball more than they have in quite a while with an actual offensive coordinator in Bill O'Brien.
Yes.
Well, Mac Jones threw the ball 54 times. I mean, you're talking about 11 targets for Kendrick Bourne from that target volume. That is very sustainable. A 20% target share, absolutely sustainable for the rest of the year. I'm not betting on Mac Jones throwing the ball 54 times every single week, but I mean, 35 to 40 for a guy that doesn't really have any rushing upside, like I would count on that. I mean, you're looking at the receiving splits here. Ezekiel Elliott out-targeted Ramondre Stevenson. He had 7 targets. Ramondre had 6.
That's so funny.
Montgomery had 3. That's Ty Montgomery, not David Montgomery. And then Kendrick Bourne with 11, leading the team in targets. Demario Douglas with 7. Juju with 7. Boutte with 4. Like, they spread the ball around big time. Hunter Henry with 8. Like, Gesicki with 3. He targeted 8 different receivers in that game with his pass attempts. So seeing Kendrick Bourne be able to bring in those touchdowns with that target volume is very encouraging. I would say that he's definitely a guy that you're going to want to look to flex in week 2 because of his production, but not something that you're going to want to see in the future starting him every single week. I do think there's a little bit of risk seeing some of those guys that he out-targeted in week 1 eventually out-target him in Kendrick Bourne just because of the way they operate, because of how much they spread the ball around. You could see that change for sure. But I mean, he ended up getting the upper hand there because of the touchdowns, because of those red zone targets, and that's what we love to see in fantasy football. That was against a very good defense in the Philadelphia Eagles. So going against the Miami Dolphins this week in week 2, that's really why we think Kendrick Bourne is such a good start this week, because that's probably going to be a pass happy game where Jalen Ramsey isn't going to be back till December. Xavier Howard, very uncharacteristically poor last season, and I think you're going to be seeing a lot of fantasy points there.
So the reason I'm a little bit higher on Kendrick Bourne long term is because I think the Bill O'Brien thing is the biggest factor in all this. Like,
yes,
their offense is completely different. So like,
it'll just be interesting to see what alpha comes out of
because
Bill O'Brien likes his alphas.
Week 1 gives me hope that because he is their ex receiver, he is scheming him up as the alpha. Like that's what it looks like to me based on watching that film, and that makes me really excited about Kendrick Bourne not only this week but gives me some hope for him going into the rest of this season. You've got the next guy on our list.
Yeah, Tyler Algier. Someone, honestly, I don't think any of us ever expected to say is a must start. I mean, even going back to last year, but this year, the Falcons obviously drafted Bijan Robinson 8th overall, and you're thinking Tyler Algier is dead. No, don't draft him really anywhere. Well, now, if you drafted him, you better be starting him, and if you didn't draft him, please pick him up. Yesterday, he He had a 56%. Well, so this will be coming out not Monday, but he had a 56% snap share. And you might think that's going to go down, but Bijan Robinson had a 63% snap share at the same time, and they both did just fine.
He did do fine.
Bijan had 20.3 points. Algier had 24.4. And so that right there is just proving both of them can produce on the same offense. Algier actually led that backfield in carries. He had 15 carries for 75 yards. That's 5 yards per carry, and he had 2 touchdowns to go along with that. And so if you think he's not going to have a role, yes, it is just week 1. I mean, you saw Michael Carter and Breece Hall do a similar thing last year where Michael Carter got a lot of those carries, but Arthur Smith has shown that he loves to run the ball. They ran the ball 559 times last year, right?
Yeah, that's
Second
right.
most in the league. And Arthur Smith is going to continue to do that. That is why he drafted Bijan Robinson. And Algier, he's going to continue to have a role in that offense. We honestly think he might have a floor around a 40% snap share. And in such a run-heavy team, those are going to be very valuable rush attempts because how good the O-line is, how good the scheme is, and he's going to keep getting goal line carries. He might keep taking those touchdowns from Bijan Robinson, but guess what? It means you got to steal in your late rounds. So if you have Tyler Algier, you should be starting him, especially when you look at his schedule upcoming. Over the next 4 weeks, he's playing Green Bay, where Joe Barry, I know it's Green Bay.
I'm glad you know that.
Joe Barry is not the best defensive coordinator there, and there's a lot of talent in that defense, but it offers a good outlook for the run game. After that, he has Detroit, Jacksonville, and Houston run defenses. So it is looking up for Tyler Algier, not just in week 2, but honestly for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
That arrow's pointing up.
The arrow's pointing up. And look, you can come in here and say, look, he's not going to be the RB4 every week. He's not going to score 2 touchdowns every week. You're right. You're absolutely right. However, and you can say that Bijan Robinson is the more valuable back because he's getting the pat. You're
He
right.
is.
That's why Bijan was going in the first round. Like, that has not changed. But we're talking about somebody you're flexing, okay? At last week's production, Tyler Algier is somebody you're starting in your first running back spot every week. This is somebody you're flexing. He's going to probably get some work on the ground. He's going to continue to get a little bit of work through the air at least, and then he has the touchdown upside as well. So we like Tyler Algier there. And let's move to our next guy, who is Jordan Addison. Last week, Justin Jefferson had 150 yards on 9 of 12 receptions. So Addison, you saw it in his first game. We saw this coming from a million miles away. We told you over
10
and
million.
over and over
Literally
and over
5
and
minutes
over
after he was drafted.
and over to draft. Yes. I wrote a whole article of it over at flockfantasy.com/domain. A whole article about it, an entire one. And Addison did it. He took advantage of the defense. He took advantage of the defense, like zeroing in on Justin Jefferson, which that didn't work either. He had 4 receptions on 6 targets. He had 61 yards, and he had a touchdown.
That's his first game ever.
His first game ever of his entire career. So moving into next week and looking at next week's matchup, they're going to play the Philadelphia Eagles. And when you look at their matchup last year with Philadelphia, Justin Jefferson actually struggled for Justin Jefferson standards. He had 6 receptions on 12 targets. He had 48 yards. So they adjusted their defense for him. They did a good job. I expect that to happen again. And that leaves weak defense to adjust for Hawk, KJ Osborne, and Addison. We're going to bet that Addison is going to be the guy. Look, they obviously don't have Gardner Johnson anymore. So their secondary is a little bit thinner than it was last year. And we're going to guess that Jordan Addison is going to be the guy that really benefits from that, especially from a yardage perspective. Like, Hockenson may get a lot of targets, and I think he will every week. Low yardage, so Hockenson's still good in his own right. But with Jordan Addison, I mean, you saw over the top, he's going to be the other threat besides Justin Jefferson there. And so we like that matchup. Again, I 16 points in his first game ever. 16 points. I'm totally comfortable flexing Addison pretty much from this week on out. But I think this week especially, they're going to be really, really focused on stopping Justin Jefferson. They have a new defensive coordinator there, but he's a guy that they promoted in-house. So he is going to run a similar defense. I think they're going to make it their priority to stop Justin Jefferson. This game is exactly why they drafted Jordan Addison. Precisely the reason. We are very comfortable with Jordan Addison this week. So.
Yeah, our next guy here is going to be Rashid Shaheed, who finished himself as a top 12 producing wide receiver, or right on the fringe there, 12-13. And he is your ideal wide receiver 3 on a team. He's your field stretcher. He's the guy who complements your Michael Thomas and Chris Olave. And so much as he is playing that position, playing that role for New Orleans, I'm actually excited about him in fantasy. If you have to plug him in for a week, if someone gets injured, if someone is questionable, you can plug in Rashid Shaheed and you're like, hey, there's a chance that he finishes as a top 16 producing wide receiver this week. Yeah, he could lay a dud. I really think he's going to be kind of a career Gabriel Davis, where anytime you're starting him, you're really happy about it. He could screw you and it sucks. But I mean,
Upside.
there's also a chance you're playing upside. That's what you play for.
And his upside is a
in
wide receiver,
fantasy.
1 weekly finish.
Yes. And I do think that if, and this is a huge if because Michael Thomas has major injury history, if Michael Thomas goes down again in the near future, I'm a lot lower on Rashid Shaheed because he automatically starts playing a role that isn't where he's at his best. So there is a caveat to this, but he's definitely a waiver pickup, definitely a guy that if you're not comfortable about your flex guy or have someone who's questionable and have some depth questions there overall, put Rashid Shaheed in, plug him in there and see what he can do this week.
Right behind him, we kind of the same case scenario right here with Josh Reynolds. Jameson Williams is suspended all the way through week 6. So until week 7, who's the Lions' deep threat? And last week we saw it's pretty obvious that it is Josh Reynolds. He had 4 receptions for 80 yards. And the Seahawks got cooked by the Rams last week. I mean, Tutu Atwell and Puka Nacua kind of just names nobody knew before this weekend. Well, they absolutely went off on the Seahawks. And so you can really expect something similar out of the Lions receivers maybe. So Josh Reynolds is someone here that honestly, like if you're looking for a deep flex play, if you're really in your bag, you can throw him in there and hope that he kind of does what he just did against the Chiefs. Similar situation. So you could shoot for some upside there.
He could be even a little bit more of a waiver wire. And so can Rashee Rice. Look, Rashee Rice, obviously he had 11.6 points in week 1. The Jags were 24th in coverage last year from their PFF grade. So, not playing a super good secondary. He had a team high 5 targets in week 1 and actually managed to catch 3 for 29 yards and a touchdown on a scheme route. So again, those aren't game-breaking stats.
Well, let's see what happens with
Yeah.
Kelsey.
Yes, and that's going to be the big thing here is a lot of people are going to say don't do anything with Rashee Rice in the near future because Kelsey will be back and Kelsey will be a target hog and take everything in the red zone. Honestly, I think if anything, Rashee Rice has shown just from week 1 that he's probably the second most competent wide receiver there who's actually going to get real volume next to MVS. MVS isn't going to get volume. Rashee Rice is the guy when you're talking about volume in that offense, which isn't saying much, but Kelsey could actually help him because you're going to have everyone focus on Kelsey on that defense. That could open up some opportunity for Rashee Rice, especially in the red zone. That's what we're looking for, upside.
Extremely well put. Make sure you drop a like on this video and make sure if you haven't, you subscribe because subscribing helps us out a ton and we're going to bring you fantasy content literally day in and day out throughout the entire NFL season. We're so glad football's back. These are guys that we're flexing in week 2. Let us know who you're flexing in week 2. We're trying to get on the more of the really fringe guys. Like everybody knows they're going to be starting most of the top 30 wide receivers in most of their leagues. These are the guys that are really fringe. We should try to do some research. So let us know what you think in the comments. Head over to flagfantasy.com/domain to get all of our exclusive content and join our community. 30% off if you use code domain. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you later.